All right. So now I will officially welcome you. My name is Julie Shields-Rutina, and I am the Director of College Planning, Education, and Training at MEFA. And I'm pleased to have all of you here today for this MEFA Institute webinar supporting undocumented students in the college planning process. And let me go through a few logistics, introduce you to our wonderful speaker, and then I will let Andrea take it from there. So on these webinars, you have control over your audio, so you can control the volume. If you have questions, and I'm sure you will, please use the question and answer, the Q&A feature. Type in your question and we will talk about it. We might talk about it during, we might wait till the end, whatever seems appropriate, but put your question there so you don't forget it. And I think it's best to do that rather than raising your hand or chatting, because then I can look in one place and make sure we keep track of all of your questions. If you need closed captioning, you can press the CC live transcript button and you will see the words that we're speaking on the screen. If you need to leave, of course you can do so, and just know that everyone who registered for this webinar will receive a follow-up email that has a link to the recording and to the slides. So you'll have all of those. You don't have to take too many notes. And quickly, I'll tell you about MEFA. If you don't already know, MEFA is a not-for-profit state authority. We've been around for 40 years. This is our anniversary or birthday. I never know which, but we have had the same mission of helping families plan, save, and pay for college for 40 years. And we have low-cost loans for families who need to finance if federal and other financial aid isn't enough. We also have the state's college savings plans. And then everything else we do is providing free guidance and education to colleges, to high schools, to counselors like you, and to families. So there's so much on our website. I hope you will take advantage of all of the resources. And the webinar you're attending now is part of the MEFA Institute. So these lessons for counselors are eligible for professional development points. So visit the Institute often and see what other topics are there, and you'll be able to receive professional development points for those. And our presenter, I'm just going to introduce her, Andrea Keenan, Director of College and Career Counseling at Excel Academy. And Andrea is a frequent presenter on MEFA webinars, and suffice it to say, you will love this webinar with Andrea. She is a wealth of knowledge on this topic and others. And Andrea, when you speak, you can give them a little more of your background. And MEFA also is on all social media. So sometimes that's a nice, easy way to get quick information. Our newest social media outlet, if that's what you call it, is Instagram. So at MEFA_MA to find lots of quick updates. And you can always call MEFA for questions, email us in the future. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and Andrea, let you start sharing your screen, and I'll let you start.
Can you see that okay, full screen?
That looks fabulous.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Julie, for having me. And hello, everyone. We've got a good crew here. So pleased to see you join. So for the next 55-ish minutes, I usually go a little over. So like Julie said, this will be recorded. If you can't stay till like 5:02, 5:05, I almost always go over. This will be recorded, and I will make sure Julie has a copy of these slides to also send along with the follow-up email. But welcome to Working with Students with Diverse Immigration Statuses. This is a guide that I have put together for fellow high school counselors. And so I hope that you will leave with some good tidbits to apply to your daily practice as soon as tomorrow, I hope. So a little bit about me. I know, Julie, thank you for introducing me. I've loved my work as a high school counselor. I've been at my current school, Excel Academy Charter High School in East Boston, for about 6 years. And this is my 11th year in the sort of ed access field. But there's nothing like working in a high school. I love it so much. It also feels like a little bit of a homecoming for me. When I immigrated to Boston in the early 90s. I remember visiting East Boston often with my mom and us having a lot of Mexican friends and community members that were helping us sort of learn the ropes of the United States. So it feels awesome for me to be able to be back in this community, helping other families. Like I alluded to, I was born in Mexico. I'm a proud immigrant. I've also been through my fair share of immigration hurdles. Expired visas, green cards, you name it, I've been through it. And so I am a very proud immigrant, though I am not currently undocumented. And so I want to just like make that super clear, that my voice in this presentation is that of an ally, someone who cares deeply about this community that I am a part of, though do not want to ever eclipse undocumented voices. And so I hope that my identity as a proud immigrant, as someone who's lived through this, and also my identity as a high school counselor who's worked with this population for over a decade, sort of gives you kind of like a glimpse into both worlds. I'm also a resource for you anytime. So as always, get in touch with MEFA, and I'm always around also to answer any questions. I love talking to fellow counselors about this and helping you think through sort of sticky scenarios. I'm here. So I want to start off with this, this slide. I'm doing things a little bit differently. So if you've been to my previous Institute seminars, I don't often start this way, but I've been really reflecting a lot about this seminar in particular and thinking about what counselors really need. And it's taken me years to kind of think about it in this way for myself and for my team as well. We have a high immigrant population here, and a pretty substantial undocumented population. But as you may have gathered from the title, which is helping students with diverse immigration statuses, immigration is a highly nuanced spectrum of statuses. So in this presentation, I don't just want to focus on students who are undocumented, but want to also give you some tools, a baseline knowledge, if you will, of really what's out there, what you may encounter on the field, and just help you start to conceptualize, or maybe you're already on that journey, just what these statuses entail. And how we can help students navigate post-secondary planning while having one of these statuses or perhaps being undocumented. So kind of that counselor baseline knowledge, and also helping us think through just how important it is for students to self-disclose their statuses. As a counselor, I cannot help any student if I don't have all the information, right? Or as much information as they're willing to share with me. And sometimes, especially when it comes to this particular subset of students, because immigration status is tied to the feeling of the law and being in disagreement with the law, oftentimes we as caring, trusted adults want to tread very carefully. But I have found that in my own practice and in my colleagues' practices, that sometimes treading carefully can toe the line with being secretive and not talking about it, or trying not to, kind of tiptoeing around the subject because we don't want to do any harm. And that is a very, that's coming from a very good place, right? And in order for us to level up our support of this population, we need to liberate ourselves, have that baseline knowledge to approach a situation with confidence, and know that it is okay to discuss a student's immigration status with that student, as long as the student is the first to initiate that conversation. And we'll get more into self-disclosure, but I want to encourage us to think about it freely, openly, and to really learn the safe ways that we can engage students and families in these dialogues. Without that, we can't fully help them plan for their futures. So I want to encourage self-disclosure. I want to encourage you to think about self-disclosure as an asset, as something in your toolkit that is just really important in thinking about this population. In order to define self-disclosure, what I mean by this, it means that a student is choosing to disclose, so they're self-disclosing to you their immigration status or lack thereof. It is something that is driven by the student. And once it happens, floodgates are open, and you as a trusted adult have the responsibility to keep their information safe, but that does not exclude you from treating that how you would any other piece of information, right? With kindness, with empathy, but then with like a lot of proactive next steps. So if you have those two things, then I think that is the perfect recipe for a safe, productive post-secondary planning process. And so I want to dig into a little bit of the self-disclosure piece before we dig into the nitty-gritty of statuses and just more of that tactical piece that I know you all want to hear today as well. So I alluded to this in my yellow slide, but I just really can't say this enough. We want to encourage do everything we can to send messages to our students, either visual or verbal cues, to say it's safe to self-disclose should you wish to do that and when you wish to do that. It needs to happen so we can help students. And want to be so clear, you can never ask a student or a family what their immigration status is. Just don't do it. I know you probably all know that already, but just can't be more clear about it. And also, please try to avoid writing emails with sensitive information, especially before a student or family has given permission to spread the information to others. So an example of this is perhaps you hear from a student that they're undocumented, but you're not the student's counselor. And so your first instinct might be, oh, I need to tell that student's counselor what I know and what I've just heard. So in that moment, just say, okay, how can I do that safely without putting information into an email? As we know, our emails are in a domain that can be accessed by others if they need to. And so we always want to avoid writing emails, especially those that include first name, last name, and a status. So what I would do in that case is maybe text my counselor friend and say, hey, can we chat for a few minutes tomorrow? I want to give you an update. And maybe just face-to-face that piece of information the next day. And also don't keep a written list anywhere of who is undocumented, whether in the main office or in your counseling suite, really anywhere, but especially ones, like I said, just with emails that includes first, last, and status in the same place. That is just a major no, and probably one of our greatest tools to keep our students' information safe. And I always throw this in there because I don't know what school districts you're all coming from, but really thinking about your school, your organization's stance on undocumented student allyship. You know, if you're here today, that means you're interested in this, you're invested in this at some level, and maybe you're an ally yourself. And so thinking about what are the things that you're already seeing at your schools. Maybe there's an immigrant student group, maybe there's a affinity group for teachers or students to join. But it could be as simple as signs in your counseling suite that say, we stand with dreamers, or we stand with undocumented students. So thinking of kind of taking a moment to self-assess kind of what's already going on in your organization and how you can contribute to that. Great. And so I want to kind of show this wacky visual, but I kind of want to start off by giving you a picture of if you have an undocumented family or a family that's going through immigration status issues, I should say, if they've self-disclosed to you, you knowing kind of like the back end of like what they're going through is super important if you yourself have never lived through this. And so for a lot of us who are immigrants, who have immigration statuses that we're weaving in and out of, or perhaps applying for statuses, there's always an end goal. We never want to stay in that same status. Ideally, we want to get on a pathway to citizenship. right? And ideally become citizens if our plan is to stay here long term. Unfortunately, in the United States, that is not always the simplest thing. We have quite a conservative immigration system, much more conservative than other countries. And so for a lot of families, that's a pipe dream. But they might have some shorter term goals, and their outcomes could be something like, we want to reach permanent residency, or we want to apply for asylum. Or maybe they've already applied for asylum and they want to get their asylum approved. They might have to wait years for that, but they might be in the process for that. There's always sort of that short-term outcome they're looking for and that long-term outcome they're looking for. Sometimes it's something as intense as they want to resist deportation. Maybe a member of the family just got a deportation notice and they're looking to hire a lawyer or some legal representation to help them resist that. Petition for new statuses. There's so many options. So that's the final outcome, right? So you might be thinking, cool, I'm not an immigration lawyer, neither am I. What do I have to do with that? I think you knowing that, and you kind of just existing in that universe with them and just being a listening ear, just knowing that they're going through these things on top of being a student, on top of being a teenager, on top of applying for college or whatever it may be. And so oftentimes though, something little that we can help with is helping students and families access what is often known as legal screenings. Legal screenings are short meetings or short sort of interactions with trusted legal aid. And these short interactions are often sort of the first step into seeing what could be possible for a family as they're navigating the immigration system. So a lot of families sometimes are in this country. They might have heard there's no hope for you. You'll never get permanent residency. They just keep living their lives as undocumented individuals, but maybe haven't really bothered to ask a trusted legal resource. Is that actually true? Like, just because my neighbor told me that this is the law, like, could there be something else out there for me? And a lot of really great agencies in the state of Massachusetts offer legal screenings. The city of Boston has a bi-weekly legal screening event. It's 2 hours long every 2 Wednesdays out of the mayor's office, where pro bono attorneys from different law schools in the area will come and free of cost to meet with people for 20 minutes, ask them lots of questions and try to kickstart something for them. Legal screenings are often short, often low cost or free, and they should be happening at a reputable agency or practice. And so sometimes that's something I do for my families, is if I know I may be helping them with their college application process, but maybe I'm also, hey, have you been to a legal screening recently? Are you working with a lawyer? Listen, I can't tell you much, but I can point you to these resources. In a later slide, I do have some of these resources listed, but just want to name drop and cannot speak more highly of MERA, M-I-R-A. The Massachusetts Immigrant Refugee Advocacy Coalition. I think I said that right. I know them as MERA. But if you Google MERA, M-I-R-A, they have a whole directory of agencies across the state, not just Boston, that you can point families to and just say, hey, it's worth a shot. Can't promise anything, but here you go. Once they're in the legal process, we're not lawyers. We're not there to kind of hold their hand through that, but we can listen, we can support. And so as administrators or as counselors, where we kind of work is this sort of hazy kind of area of like, what are your options, right? I'm going to try to get you connected to something while I'm also helping you with, life at school. And another way that you can support while they're going through legal process, if you know they're already going through a legal process, whether it's through a legal screening you advise them to attend or not, is offer logistical support as a counselor. Sometimes families are going through immigration processes that require court appearances, and oftentimes as a counselor, I'm the person that my student says, hey, miss, I actually have a court date, or my mom has a court date next week. I'm afraid to miss class. Help me. What do I do? I can help them navigate that, ask for time off from their classes, or at least help them or connect with the teachers and say, hey, the student needs to do something this day. Can you excuse their work for this day, or something like that. Letters of support are actually also really important and kind of a key role that sometimes trusted adults, whether it's administrators or people families know in school or other agencies that might be helping them, we can write letters of support. And I've written many of them. What a letter of support is a piece of supporting documentation their lawyer might ask to complete their file. I most recently wrote a letter of support for a mom and dad who were at risk of deportation. And my letter of support was very short, but it basically said, listen, this family's awesome. And if these parents were not here in this country to support their student could not be as successful as they currently are. The student happened to have an IEP. I knew the family was at every single family conference, just kind of speaking to just my experience of that family and why they needed to remain in the US. It is completely safe for us to do this. It gets sent to their lawyers. You don't have to put your home address on it. You can just put your name on school letterhead, and that's it. If you have any questions about any of this, again, I'm not an immigration lawyer, just a high school counselor, but always, be in touch and I can help kind of troubleshoot if you're being asked to do this and not sure about it. Also want to kind of name that, I've been talking a lot about sort of these like more logistical, I work in a school, I might be able to help in these ways, but as counselors, we really need to look at this population as a really special population. And you may need to look at your programming even just for a few minutes and say, hey, what are some strategies that we could embed into our work with these students? There's some macro strategies, micro strategies. For both of these strategies that I'm going to talk about a few right now, I think my takeaway is we need to get creative with this population. And oftentimes that's hard because our time is precious and our time is often, we're just pulled in so many different directions. So even little micro strategies can go a long way with this population. This is also a population that needs a lot of communication. And this ties into my earlier point of their status should not be taboo once they've self-disclosed. We do need to be careful, but we don't need to be hesitant about really being honest and open with students, especially if you don't know something. If a student has self-disclosed to you and you're like, wow, you are my first undocumented student that I've ever worked with. And I've attended a training about this and I'm ready to help. And even if I don't know everything, student name, I'm going to be with you every step of the way. We've got this. Like even just those affirming words, those words of honesty of like, I may not know everything, but like, thank you for trusting me and like, let's go. I'm going to fact find can go a long way. And so the first strategy that I want to talk about is keeping lists. I know I just said, don't keep a list, and really don't keep a list. But I find often in my work as a high school counselor, especially if you have a larger undocumented population, it is just really hard to keep track and tabs. So my cautious recommendation for you is that there is a way you can keep a list as long as you don't include last names and don't include statuses on your list. And the reason I say this is if you are in a high school that has 40, 50, 60 immigrant students that you're helping and you're just like struggling to remember them all, you do have to kind of find a way to organize and try to roll call these students in a safe way. So what I would do if you're just trying to get a grasp on who even is this population, a lot of students don't disclose publicly, so you may have a hard time fact finding. I've always tried to connect with 9th or 10th grade counselors to say, hey, have you heard anything about any student that I should know about related to immigration? I'm just trying to understand who these students might be. So figure out kind of a way that you can kind of do that, whether it's just a coded list of first names. Again, I say that cautiously because best practice is do not keep a list, and try to only share it with your immediate counseling team. So when I say safe, I mean no first names, last names attached to an immigration status. So whenever I do keep a list, my lists are always coded something else and just first names. And that's the way that I protect myself and my students. I happen to have a larger population. You may not have to keep a written list anywhere if you have a smaller population. My second strategy for counselors is what I've piloted at my school, and we've really enjoyed coming together and kind of liberating our talk around this population, is what I call the counselor calibration meeting. This is an example of a macro strategy because you would implement this alongside your other counselors, or in your case, other advisors, whoever kind of is around you. We need this because targeted and strategic counselor advocacy goes a long way. As you know, especially students applying to four-year college, counselor advocacy matters, strategy matters, but especially with this group. So let me give you an example. Say you have 10 undocumented students, or maybe 10 students, a few of them might not be fully undocumented, but they might not be citizens or permanent residents. And there's varying statuses. You have to ask yourself first, do they qualify for financial aid? And those students, the ones that do not qualify for, you need to be extra strategic around finding good fits for them, and for four-year colleges especially, that will give them either merit-based aid or will be close to home. They can live at home and get some merit-based aid, and maybe family has already said we can afford this much, and maybe you come up with one or two schools that would be perfect fits for them. You talk to them about that school, the students on board. There's transparency around, listen, college is so expensive, but I think there's a way this one could work. So what if you do all that work with one student? What about the other 9? And so this is where this counselor calibration meeting comes in. You kind of lay it all on the table. Every counselor brings their kiddos, and you're kind of like, this is what I have, people. I have 3 of these students. These are their GPAs. This is what they want for themselves. Who do you have? Who do you have? And then you're like, oh, shoot, we have 4 students that want to apply to the same school. Now, feasibly, will that college fund all 4 of these undocumented students? Probably not. And so that's where the strategy comes in of okay, well, I know this student, this is their first choice. They have a major that the student needs. It's not a major they can find anywhere else. This is the perfect fit for this student. Maybe another counselor might say, you know what? My student has 3 top choices. I can steer them a little bit away from this one, and maybe try to encourage them to look at other options. Again, we don't want to manipulate students, but I think there is kind of a strategy to consider when trying to spread the wealth, trying to spread merit aid around, and trying to channel and protect your time. If you're going to be doing advocacy at one college for a few students, you want that advocacy to be for the right students. And so Hallie suggests that you think about a counselor calibration meeting. Again, don't take notes that say undocumented student meeting. Call it something else. Call it quarter 1 checkpoint, and just use first names. Don't put immigration statuses on that list. But there is a way that you can take these notes, maybe on a Google Doc or something, and have it be something that everyone in the team is kind of thinking about and updating. The ideal timing for this, I believe, is probably around early to mid-December, before regular decision application deadlines, but late enough that students have a better idea of where they want to apply. So don't do this counselor calibration meeting too soon, because things might, shake out differently than you initially thought. But if you do try this, let me know how it goes. Feel free to reach out to me. I would be happy to help you workshop maybe a different method or something that might work for you. I'm doing a lot of reflection and research about this in my own practice, so would be happy to collaborate with any of you that want to think this through. And just want to briefly end this section with just sort of some guidelines around talking to students who might be undocumented, or who are undocumented, or have different immigration statuses. This might go without saying, but make your office undocu-friendly. Make it clear you're an ally. Sometimes counselors think that a little sticker they might put up might not make a difference, but let me tell you, it does. I had a student the other day come up to me and self-disclose, kind of not that randomly. We were talking about something else, but we're kind of, having a little heart-to-heart, and they finally self-disclosed to me and said, I'm undocumented. And I said, thank you so much for trusting me. I'm like really grateful. I wasn't expecting this. And they said, well, I noticed your undocu-friendly sticker on your door and have been kind of just like watching you interact with other undocumented students. And I knew you were a person I could talk to. That happened. They notice, they hear things. So even just a little decal goes a long way. Also think about how you can do this virtually. If you have a counseling page or a Google website that students go to, do you want to post a little logo there that says, we're an undocu-friendly office, come talk to us. You want to just like encourage students to see you as that. You can proactively assess the situation too. If you don't know their status, so you have to ask yourself, do I know the student status or not? If it's a no, but you suspect something, you might notice that the student's 16, 17, 18, but not getting a driver's license. And you might have asked them about it randomly and they were maybe a little cagey about it and change the subject, or, that could be a slew of things. Don't assume, but there could be some things that you piece together that you're like, maybe there's something there. My piece of advice here is, especially as they're seniors and you're having them in for meetings, is give students and families chances to tell you. Don't ask them directly. We can't do that. But a line that I always use is there anything else you want to share with me that, I don't know, would help me kind of better advise you? Anything about, a situation that's happening, or just anything that you think would help me better advise you for your life after high school. They might not say anything right away, but they might notice that you have that decal on your wall, and they might notice you were working with a few other undocumented students, and they might say, okay, next time I'll share that with my counselor. So give them kind of a chance, present them with opportunities for them to self-disclose. If the answer to, if their status is a yes, like say you inherit a caseload, or you finally are getting in your caseload, maybe you work with 11th and 12th graders and you're meeting your 11th graders, and maybe a counselor has already told you that a student is undocumented, you have to kind of still go through this thought process of like, how did I find out about their status? Did the student themselves share it with me? If yes, did that student give you permission to share it with others? Now, if you forgot to ask when they first self-disclosed, don't ever fear going back to the subject. So honesty and communication are key. So say that you had a 10th grader last year tell you they're undocumented. Now you're not their counselor anymore. You're handing them off. Go back to that student and say, hey, now that I'm not your counselor, I really think that, Miss So-and-so could benefit from knowing your status. Like, would you mind if I share that with them? Or do you want to share that yourself? And you can kind of say that. You have to ask for the student's permission before you share that, or do kind of a blanket statement saying, hey, sometimes, us counselors, we collaborate a lot. Would you be okay if I shared this with just my office, just my counseling office? So we can try to like come up with different strategies for you. And if they give you a blanket yes, then you can go forward and share that. Same with if you heard about it from others. So unless the student gave permission for that person to share it with you, it's as if you didn't know. So you can either ask that that teacher that shared with you, hey, did they give you permission to share with me? Or you can go to the student and again, like kind of go back to that square one and give them a chance to tell you. I know this feels really complex, like why am I going through all of the things? But it's important to name trust is key. Especially with the international population at your school, the undocumented population, if one student feels like their trust was misplaced, they'll tell others, and then students won't tell anyone their status is, and they won't want to self-disclose. So as adults, it's our responsibility to keep their information safe from the outside world, but it's also our responsibility to uphold and honor their trust. And as long as you're open and honest and ask them if you can share, then all is good, and we'll feel like you're upholding that. I also just want to name, once a student self-discloses and once you're kind of on a path with them, their process, their college planning process, their mental health, check-ins process, like all of that might take up a little bit more time. And I think we just have to kind of be okay with that. My strategy is to have as many short check-ins with students as possible. Like even if it's just 2 minutes in the hallway, I have these students on my radar. I'm checking in with them saying, hey, how you doing? Okay, I'm here if you need anything. It's just, they're just that kind of population. And so the last piece here is about tough conversations. When you know the student doesn't qualify for federal aid, this is one of the toughest situations I ever encounter. And honesty here, kind of full disclosure, is the best antidote. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about statuses in just a few minutes, but say you're at the point where you've done some fact finding, well, they self-disclose, then you've done some fact finding and you realize, shoot, I thought the student would be able to file a FAFSA, but now I know they don't. Heartbreaking for sure. And take your student through your thought process. Think through scenarios with the student. They appreciate that. So something like, shoot, student name, I know we had talked about this, and I know it seemed like you could file a FAFSA, but as you know, now we know this new information. And like we read here on this government website, you don't qualify. I'm so sorry about that. But listen, we'll get through this. There's so many other things like scholarships and things that we can tackle together. Just that full acknowledgement, right? That's what they want. They don't want you to pretend you know, or for you to say it'll all work out. Like they just want the truth. If the student's completely undocumented, you should explain to the student that public colleges are the least affordable. Like that's a tough thing to say, but you have to say it. Don't be afraid to say kind of the tough things. Again, they appreciate that, and always kind of come up with a next step. So you can say, because you're fully undocumented, you would have to pay out-of-state tuition at public college. That's this much more. You can do the math out with them. Like that is a lot of money. So I think we might need to consider some private colleges that might offer some merit aid. You may have to live at home. So there's, jot down those scenarios for them, name for them, your list might be a smaller list. We might have to get really creative, but we'll be really intentional about every college we put on your list. Just look them in the eyes and kind of just say that and just like hold space for them in that moment. And then absolutely a great next step that students that have just received really bad news from just life and the world, like not qualifying for federal aid. A great next step that often lights them up is immediately giving them some resources to apply for private scholarships, especially if their GPA is above a 3.0. Getting them connected to those private scholarship resources is just, I think, the best next step. It feels actionable. It gives you more talking points with them. Next check-in, you can say, hey, how's your scholarship search going? That kind of thing. And if I don't get to it, because it's kind of buried near the end, there is an entire slide with scholarship resources that I always point my students to. Okay. So that was about a little more than half our time, but hopefully you think that was well spent, because these are just kind of the nuances of our practice that sometimes we don't get at other immigration trainings, which tend to be really useful, but really packed with just kind of the legal pieces, which are great. And as counselors, it's all these other little threads that we also need to think about, sort of engaging our students and building those relationships with our students. I want to just start this second part with just echoing something you've probably heard mentioned in other undocu-friendly spaces, but try to avoid using the word illegal. It's something that we don't like in our immigrant community, right? No human being is illegal. And I want to really showcase this resource here. So the second image has a link to ImSchools. This is a great organization. I don't personally know the founder, but I've used some of their toolkits, but they do a lot of work around helping organizations become undocu-friendly. You can see they have some posters, some inclusivity posters, and some kind of cool little resources. So just wanted to highlight that this was linked in this, this poster. I also want to highlight that this image links to some pretty cool sort of intel. Oh, not that. Behind the making of the Migration is Beautiful poster. So you may have seen the Migration is Beautiful posters around, and you often see the monarch butterfly happen. And so just wanted to give you a little background on who created the Migration is Beautiful poster. It's an artist named Fabiana Rodriguez, who's really behind the idea, or her and many others in the movement are behind the idea of the butterfly being a symbol for migration, and just how beautiful that is. It's just so beautiful. It could be something you can consider putting in your, in your around your office and in your materials. I want to present to you 5 concepts that I think are really important for you to know. The first is pathway to citizenship, just kind of thinking through what that actually means in the life of an undocumented person. Dreamers, Dream Act, those are 2 buzzwords we've heard a lot about recently. Undocu-friendly, that just means being friendly toward the undocumented community and just having a warm, inclusive, liberated space, or being a liberated person when it comes to this population. Sanctuary city or sanctuary organization. So I'm going to touch upon these vocab words in the next like 20-ish minutes. I want to give you some numbers. I talked a little bit about the pathway to citizenship. So picture this, it takes on average 10 to 16 years for a skilled worker to even dream about getting on the pathway to citizenship or become a citizen. So in an immigration system, becoming a citizen of the country you immigrate to is the ultimate goal if you plan to want to reside there long term, right? That's what we all dream of when we want to move and relocate and migrate into a new space. The United States makes that a little bit tricky. Not everyone that immigrates to this country gets on a pathway to citizenship. You can migrate to this country with documentation, do everything that by the book, have a work permit, reside here, everything right, and still never get on a pathway to citizenship. That's just how our immigration system works. So someone coming from another country, who maybe has an advanced degree, who offers something very tangible, very useful to the United States, might eventually, through being a skilled worker, get access to get on a pathway to citizenship. But even for those people, it doesn't happen immediately. It takes 10 to 16 years to even try, on average, to even try to get on that pathway. So imagine what everyone else has to go through. And I don't want to get too personal here, but I know people in my life who've been here 20, 30 years and don't have any way to get on a pathway to citizenship. And so plug here for why the push for comprehensive reform matters, why it's not enough to give 4,000, 5,000 students in Massachusetts DACA. It's just not enough. And states have a lot of power in this as well. I'm going to talk a little bit about how the state policies can really change the pathway and trajectory for a lot of dreamers. And so I'm not going to go through this this infographic, but once you get the slides and you want to look a little more closely, if you're not familiar with the immigration system in the US, this is a very sort of eye-opening infographic. It's really tough to navigate. And so if we're thinking about our students who we work with, these are figures that I took courtesy of the Pew Center. These are quite several years old by now, but you can see what some of these estimates look like. I reckon these are quite quite lowballed, but 11.2 million undocumented immigrants of all ages living in the United States. Again, it's probably way more than that. Of those, 1.1 million are under the age of 18 living in the US. Of those, 65,000 are graduating from high school each year. And of those, only about 7 to 13 are actually enrolling in college every year. This is why you being here matters, because they're getting these messages that they can't go to college when we know they can. But being undocumented or being an immigrant just sometimes makes you so self-conscious, you'll believe what you hear, and you might think, I'm better off in the shadows. I'm better off not even fighting for this because I'm gonna hit roadblocks. So this is why you having this baseline knowledge to really equip yourself and your students and be there to fight alongside them to get financial aid, to advocate for that scholarship. All of those action steps will change lives. Put a different way, just really staggering how many undocumented students are just not accessing higher education. Not because they can't, there's no federal law that says they can't access federal education. Oftentimes it comes down to the funding or them just believing or hearing that they can't from who knows who is saying that to them. And so when we're talking about this population, thinking about just how many immigration statuses are out there in the United States. Some of these statuses might put you on the path to citizenship, but some will not. So there's naturalized citizen, I-94s, sort of the asylum bucket, refugee status, temporary protective status, the green card holders, the permanent resident card holders, T visas, U visas, JMF visas, other temporary visas, DACA, which is not actually a status. It's an exemption from deportation, but I'm adding it here because a lot of our families, our students, maybe not current students, but maybe siblings of older students might have DACA. Family-sponsored visas, self-petitioners under the Violence Against Women Act, or special immigrant juvenile status. And then finally, undocumented. You can see how many shades are within that. And even within this, students might be weaving in and out of these different statuses. I show you this because the takeaway should not be, I need to know everything about these statuses. The takeaway should be, I know these statuses exist, and I may not know everything about them, but if I've heard them, I know that I at least, once a student self-discloses to me, should try to fact find a little bit more to make sure I have accurate information about what their status is. Because if you don't have accurate information, then you can actually advise them, right? What if a student says they think they're undocumented, but actually they have temporary protective status? Or maybe a student says, oh, I have asylum. Great, you can file a FAFSA. Oh, wait, has your asylum been granted or is it pending? Because there's a difference. Do you mind if maybe we talk to your mom and try to figure that out? Because actually, depending on which one you have, could alter, your course for when you're filing your FAFSA or applying to college. So it's like that kind of fact finding that want to really empower you to not be afraid of. A lot of our students might not even know their statuses, which, kind of makes sense. Growing up, I weaved in and out of statuses. I didn't quite know at any given moment if I had a green card or work authorization. Some families do it out of love and wanting to protect and shield their students from that. So as much as we want to obviously honor, treasure, and believe what our students are saying, a little fact finding goes a long way. And so again, once they've self-disclosed, get after it, talk to the student, ask them a permission to maybe have a family meeting, call mom, call dad, respectfully say, hey, Mrs. So-and-so, student name, student, share this with me. I'm just so grateful they share this with me. I want to encourage you to remember that everything you share with me is completely safe. I'm never going to share it with any institution or anyone unless you give me permission to. And so I can help you better. I had a few other questions. Your students said that you had asylum. Congratulations. That's so exciting that you have something like that. Do you mind if I ask, is it pending? Has it been granted? That might help me be able to help your student better. So if you're narrating that to a family, they're willing to share, once that student has self-disclosed. This is why it really matters in our line of work. If we take what they say at face value and don't quite fact find, we may be missing a key piece of information. And really this is at the crux of it. Are they eligible for federal financial aid? Can they apply for FAFSA basically? And so it comes down to really, do they have a status that gives them an employment authorization card? Or do they have a status that gives them a permanent resident card? Because if they have the green card, which is the permanent resident card, the one that's mostly green and blue, they are eligible to apply for federal aid. And if they and the good news is, if they have a permanent resident card or a green card, they are most likely on a pathway to citizenship, which is awesome. And employment authorization is still great. They can reside and work and file taxes, but not get Title IV federal funds for college. And so oftentimes, I've had this happen so many times, a student tells me, yeah, I have a card. I'll bring it in, we'll fill out my FAFSA. And then they get there, they pull out an employment authorization card. And so that goes back to that conversation I kind of talked us through earlier of like what to do in that moment. I just want to note the FAFSA uses what's called an A number. So it asks for an A number. If you're an eligible non-citizen, you have a permanent resident card, they'll want you to, in addition to your social security card, put in what FAFSA calls an A number. I just want to note that A number is sort of an antiquated version of what you currently see in the permanent resident cards, which is referred to as a USCIS number. So that 9-digit number is a crucial number for them to know and for them to have, and it's equal to the A number as it's referred to in the FAFSA. So just don't get confused there. You can see that the employment authorization card also has a USCIS number. That's because that's the way the USCIS agency, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, sort of keeps a tab on all these holders of these cards. So it's just a ID number. And so I'm hopeful that this all feels helpful. If I know it's a lot of information, so if you have any questions, I don't see any in the chat. Maybe you're all just intently taking all this in, but feel free to chime in with questions in the chat. To make things a little bit more complicated, some of these statuses have are issued what's called an I-94. Sometimes this happens before they're issued a more permanent card. Sometimes that is just what they have to show what status they have in this country. Again, I'm not an immigration lawyer, so I don't want to get into, I do know quite a bit about this, but I don't want to get into too much nitty-gritty. I just want you to know that these exist sometimes in lieu of actual cards. They're no longer issuing paper-based I-94s. So who I mean by they is the Department of Homeland Security when someone is entering or leaving the country. They used to be issued in paper form, sort of stapled into a passport. Some families, some students might still have the paper versions, but currently they're only, or they've moved away. U.S. Customs and Border Protection has moved into the electronic I-94. But as you can see, they have a record number, they have dates that their status might expire, and some of these I-94 holders are eligible for federal aid, some of them are not. And so we'll get into, in the slide in just a minute or two, we'll get into like who these people are. Just want to also briefly mention the DREAM Act. The DREAM Act has been around as an idea for a very long time. And when it was first conceived, it stood for Development, Relief, and Education for Alien Minors. I don't like the word, we don't like the word alien anymore. It's a little antiquated, but just wanted to honor the history of the DREAM Act. The DREAM Act has not passed. It's made it to Congress several times. 2012 is when it, or 2011 and 2011 is when it got most close to being passed. It was not passed, but then that's when President Obama, sort of through different situations, was able to give the advocates that were fighting for this a little bit of something, which was DACA. DACA is not the DREAM Act. The DREAM Act the ideal version of the DREAM Act would give many undocumented youth and people a pathway to citizenship. That's the dream, right? Pathway to citizenship. DACA does not do that. But DACA holders who you may come across will have employment authorization cards, right? So that's that blue and red card that I showed earlier on the right. And that's awesome because it gives them authorization to work, and they're able to get a social security number for tax filing purposes, which is awesome. So if you want to read more about DACA, DACA has been in the news a lot because people are fighting over it. Basically, you can see here back when this was created or DACA was signed as an executive action, you had to have been undocumented on June 15, 2012, have arrived in the US before 2007, before you're 16 years old, and have no felony convictions. And so you can see here that it's becoming dated. I mean, this is 10 years old at this point. And so right now, currently in my high school population, I don't have any DACA holders. My seniors were born in 2005. And so a lot of them don't qualify for DACA, which is why DACA is not enough. We need the DREAM Act. Recently, there's been a lot of talk about DACA because of what's been happening with the US Court of Appeals. And so it was sort of a judge kind of ruled that it just wasn't constitutional. And another judge ruled that it kind of was. And so currently DACA is sort of at a crossroads. I have the official language here from USCIS. So at this time, prior DACA holders can still apply to renew their DACA status, which is a 2-year, or I shouldn't say status, sorry, their DACA, which is an exemption from deportation. It's given on 2-year intervals. And so they can still renew those people that have DACA already. What is less clear is what will happen to all of the new applications, which are currently being accepted, but they're sort of frozen. They're not, USCIS is not processing any new applications. So the future of DACA is still very hazy, and just encourage you to keep up with the news and thinking about how that affects your own allyship and things like that. Please check out United We Dream. They're a terrific resource for the most up-to-date info. United We Dream is the OG grassroots organization for this movement, and their content is for the immigrant community. And I find that it is very student-friendly and very parent-friendly. The whole page can be translated into multiple languages, and they just have a lot of advocacy resources made by and for the immigrant community. I also want to bring up temporary protective status because temporary protective status is a status I see a lot, especially with our families from Haiti, El Salvador, Honduras, Nepal, Nicaragua, Sudan, Venezuela. I want to give a huge shout out to Mira. I pulled these stats from their website, or this information the way it's presented here. Temporary protective status is sort of designated and extended for periods of either several months or a year. And that's why fact finding, again, is important, because if a student has this status, it's great, it's secure, but they don't have a permanent resident card. And so you have to kind of think through that. So just to kind of remind you of these two cards. Other issues I see for undocumented students is definitely harder for them to travel abroad. So a lot of my seniors who are undocumented can't study abroad and kind of know that. And so even just having a trusted adult to kind of help them think through, well, maybe I don't study abroad in another country, but maybe I do an internal sort of US-based exchange program or something in college. A lot of the students that are fully undocumented would be someone who doesn't have any documentation, right? So wouldn't have an employment authorization card, wouldn't have a permanent resident card. And it's those students that I find just need additional supports and additional time, because those students can't work legally in the United States. And so for our TPS holders, for our DACA holders, they can at least work and pay taxes, which makes students feel just like they're taking action steps toward their future. Undocumented students don't have that. I've seen a lot of students lose motivation for working in high school, or sorry, working in their classes if they think, well, I can't do anything after high school anyway. And again, that's where the counselors come in. And so this page here kind of gives you a bunch of resources that I love to use. I mentioned Mira earlier for the legal screenings. Always refer to trusted legal sources for your own information. I mentioned 3 of them here. And then immigrant-led organizations that you can always point your students to. Want to remind ourselves as we get to the last 5 minutes of the presentation, if you can stick around, that would be awesome. Just about some of these financial aid policies that I've alluded to. There is no federal law that prohibits undocumented immigrants going to U.S. colleges. And so that's really important for us to know. And it's important for us to know that public campuses across the United States, though, do have differing policies and things and help. And so this is a map of different states, or all the states, sorry. But you can see that the dark green states are what I would call the most undocu friendly. So these are not only states that are saying anyone's welcome on our public campuses, because for the most part, they all do that. But these are states that are giving undocumented students financial aid. That's huge, right? And you might look over at Massachusetts and think, what about us? We're not even a color. We don't give undocumented students financial aid or any help to go to public campuses. We have some work to do, I think. There are some states, like the ones in red, that do ban enrollment to undocumented students at public campuses. So that's just something to think about. Something that's good, though, about Massachusetts is that we do allow DACA and TPS holders, anyone really with a work authorization card, to receive in-state tuition. So that's something that's at least something that's workable for a lot of students in Massachusetts. Great. I actually want to pause. There is a question in the chat asking about students who, let's see. I'm reading the question. I have students who have become comfortable with me regarding their status and send me emails regarding scholarships that may mention their status. Should I encourage them not to do so? That's a really good question. I would say email should contain pretty much every detail except for their status. I think you just name for students. It's just good practice to not put your status in writing, not to make them scared, but just sort of as more of a habit that they're forming. But they can still sort of say, hey, I found this scholarship that is a great fit because of these reasons, and just not say, because I'm undocumented. I think that's just what we want to avoid in writing. But if email is the way that you communicate with your student regarding scholarships, I would say just continue to do that and mention, just don't say, I am my status in that email. Thank you for asking that. Okay, so just want to remind you who is eligible for federal aid, and it's really anyone that holds that permanent resident card. So any U.S. citizens would not hold a permanent resident card, but would have their passport. But any U.S. permanent resident would have a green card, as well as eligible non-citizens. So it's anyone holding that green card on this slide. This slide comes from the federal government's financial aid website. I also really encourage counselors to always have Chapter 2 of the federal aid handbook just bookmarked in your browser, it has photos of all of the different types of documentation that are eligible for federal aid. So as you're fact-finding with your families, if you come across something I haven't mentioned in this presentation, most likely this chapter linked here that's used by financial aid officers at colleges will have a sample of that documentation that you might be seeing that maybe looks a little bit different than what I've shown you here. Especially that green card and employment authorization, but there's a few other things that that you may come across that you may not know. I also, I get asked this question a lot regarding social security numbers. The person filing the FAFSA should have a social security number and be a holder of either that green card or another status that is eligible for financial aid. And if the student filling out the FAFSA's parents are undocumented, they can still fill out a FAFSA, and they should just put in all zeros instead of their social security number when it asks them under parent information. The only difference there is that they would have to fill out or print out and sign a signature page and then have it sort of manually mailed to the federal aid processing center, which takes around 3 weeks to process. So it's a much slower process than an FSA ID, an electronic signature at the end of the FAFSA, but it's perfectly doable. It just takes a little bit longer. For the CSS profile, especially for your higher achieving students who might have like a 3.9 GPA and are considering highly selective colleges, or 4.0 GPA, or really any student applying to highly selective CSS profile colleges who are undocumented, my recommendation is to have the special circumstances section in the CSS profile be where they self-disclose. Their information via the CSS is still protected by FERPA. It's a very safe way for an undocumented student to share with the college that they're undocumented, and that's a space they can advocate for more financial aid. So there are very safe ways for students to self-disclose. And just want to make that distinction that our undocumented students who are going to high school here are undocumented, though a lot of colleges may want to label them as international. I just had a student come back to visit this year who is undocumented, is at a highly selective liberal arts institution in New England, and they knew he was undocumented. They gave him a lot of financial aid, and still when he got to campus, he appeared on the international roster list. And so he went to the international student office and said, "Hey, I'm happy to get all these supports, and I have a work permit. I just got a work permit. I don't have a J visa. I don't have an F1 visa. So just want to make sure." And I'm proud of that student for having advocated for themselves. But if you notice that a college is flagging a student for something, you're like, this doesn't make sense, always encourage the student to advocate, but you can also be there with a student when you're calling the financial aid office or calling the admissions office to try to resolve an issue that may just be a misunderstanding, an internal misunderstanding within the office. I see a lot of my undocumented students flagged as international in the application process. And that's only because it's an automated thing. Sometimes they fill out their Common App, they don't put a social in there, and then internally, whatever system the school uses, they just get flagged as international. And they might get an email that says, "Hey, you need to take your TOEFL exam." They might come to me and say, "Miss, what does this mean? I speak English. I've been here since I was 3. And so that, again, that's an example where a counselor can come in handy, say, "All right, it seems like we should email them back and let them know that you're a student in high school and you shouldn't be made to take the TOEFL because you don't have to." So those kinds of distinctions. I have a question here that someone just put in the chat. Is it generally safe to disclose student statuses to college? Yes. In Massachusetts, at both public and private institutions, it is safe. Regarding that map that I showed you earlier, there are some states that their public campuses may not be undocu-friendly, which means in those states, I wouldn't self-disclose to those public colleges. But generally speaking, yes, very safe. FERPA comes into play here, and their records and information are sealed from outside sources. just like anything else would be, their financial information, all other things. So very safe. And that's something you can talk through with students as well. And so, yeah, this actually just speaks to this. Be honest about their immigration status. Always try to connect with someone in the admissions office who works with multicultural students. Offices are getting better about this. 10 years ago, I used to call with questions and would get blank answers saying, we don't know. I think we have one undocumented student on campus, not sure. That was 10 years ago. It's a different landscape now. There probably will be someone in the admissions office who works with undocumented students, not everyone. So you may still have to coach the student to not get discouraged if they call admissions and they get a grad student on the phone who has no idea. Just coaching them to stay persistent, stay strong. Maybe you can get on the phone with them next time, something like that. My friends, the last 3 slides, I'm just going to breeze through, but I'm just going to tell you what they are. They're more sort of nitty gritty what to do regarding just counseling students in high school while you have them in front of you, different opportunities they can take advantage of if they're undocumented to earn credit at a cheaper rate, like CLEP exams, dual enrollment, EP classes. Any little bit counts to help an undocumented student save money for college. And then in the next 3 slides, I have just some very unique sort of little strategies and thoughts, musings, if you will, about working with different buckets of student profiles. Like what might you do if you have a higher GPA undocumented student? What you might do if the student's between a 3.0 and a 3.7. There's some strategic things to think about with merit aid, perhaps. And what about a student with a GPA below a 3.0 who might be hesitant to go to college? And so I just have some tidbits here that I'm happy for you to take a look at and connect with me if you have any questions or you have a particular student that you might be struggling with. Just always don't hesitate to reach out. And then as promised, here are some additional scholarship resources. I really want to make a plug for number 2. It's an app that a student of mine discovered last year. And it's actually a pretty cool little app. And I just noticed how much more motivated my student got going through an app and scrolling versus me handing them a PDF, which is more old school. But I do love number 4, Immigrants Rising Scholarship Resource Guide. It's a PDF. It's lengthy. A lot of California and Texas scholarships in there, but there are some gems in there that students can apply to. My friends, that I'm only 14 minutes over, but thank you so much for staying till the end, for listening, for engaging. We still have 4 participants here with us. So don't know if you have any last minute questions before I close out our time today.
And thank you so much, Andrea. That information was really great. And thank you to participants who have asked some questions. And let's see. I don't see any, but that's wonderful that your contact information is there too, Andrea. And I'm sure people will follow up.
Yes. Thank you so much for being here, for being such a great audience. I hope you're walking away feeling a little bit more like you have a few more things in your toolkit as a counselor. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening. Oh, let's see one more. Yes. A question. Yes, I will send a link to the recording and the slides tomorrow. Thanks for that last question. All right. Bye.